So it's been a few months since Marvel Spider-Man 2 came out, and on reflection, there definitely are some holes and some things that I'm not really too keen on when it comes to the game. Don't get me wrong, this game is still one of the best pieces of Spider-Man media that we have ever gotten, but it's not exactly top tier. And the reason for that is because of this man. Yes, Norman Osborn, I think, is a huge problem in Marvel's Spider-Man 2. He's not great in this game, and it's got me worried for Marvel's Spider-Man 3 because of it. But before we get into my reasonings as to why, I want to urge you to subscribe to the channel. We upload Spider-Man content every single week, so if you love the webhead, then this is the channel for you. But with that being said, let's get straight into this. Okay, so why is Norman Osborn a bad character? It's not actually as simple as you may think. Because when you look at it from a surface level point of view, he doesn't actually appear that bad to begin with. During the course of the story, Norman's character is heavily tied to Harry Osborn and his story throughout the game. Obviously, right? It's his dad. The story also leans on Norman's mental instability towards the decline of his son's health, and the story revolves around the symbiote. And this is generally a good thing, showing us how people close in Harry's life are affected by his decline into becoming Venom is great, and obviously it adds more stakes to Harry's story. It also adds more depth to the consequences and the outcome of the Venom and Spider-Man fight during the end of the game. We're not just battling to save a city from a massive symbiote invasion, we're battling to save Harry and, you know, his family relationships. We're saving the relationship between us and Harry, MJ and Harry, Norman and Harry. There are personal stakes within the story as well. We also learn in this game a little bit more about Harry's mother as well, and this spurs Norman on even more to not lose his son in the same way that he lost his wife. So far so good, right? Well, not so much. You see, my main issue with Norman in this game revolves around the fact that he is used as a stake in Harry's story rather than acting as his own individual stake in the overall story, which could potentially affect the outcome of the franchise as a whole. Now, I know that sounds really convoluted and, quite frankly, a little bit confusing, but just hear me out and let me explain. Norman's character's purpose in Marvel's Spider-Man 2 is to try and save Harry and to cure him of his disease. And that makes sense, that's his main goal throughout this game. However, that's where my biggest issue comes in. It's never shown what kind of consequences come along with this. He isn't exactly a passive character by any means. In fact, Norman's probably one of the more active characters throughout the story. But he only kind of shows up when Harry's story demands him to, not when Norman's story demands him to. We're talking about a character that has been calculating in the background of the franchise for 5 years now, waiting to become the main villain of the third game. So you'd assume that we'd get a little bit more to his character rather than, oh, Norman has to save Harry. Oh, we're doing this to save Harry. We're doing this to save Harry. Like, come on, show us other aspects of Norman's life. It wouldn't have been hard to show us how Oscorp may have been affected by this consistent focus on Harry's health decline. It wouldn't have been hard to lean more on what it means for Norman to resign as the mayor, but rather we didn't get any of these developments in his character. Rather, it was very just surface level. And a part of me thinks that this is just an overall representation of the game as a whole. The game had so many characters and so many plot threads that it had to deal with that I think Norman was kind of pushed to the side a little bit. And I think Norman is probably one of, if not the most important character going forward in the franchise, because he is literally going to be your big bad of your grand finale big Marvel Spider-Man 3 game coming in a few years' time. So I think if you were going to focus on one character in particular, especially an antagonist, Norman is going to be that character that you would have focused on. So personally for me, I would have loved to have seen more scenes of Norman's power being taken away from him, what it means for Norman's power to be lost. And we know that Norman is a power-hungry man and his ego runs off the ability he has to control others. A great example of this character trait is the scene from the first game, which is actually our first introduction to Norman Osborn in this universe. When we first meet him, he's always framed as a big and bulky man. As Spider-Man ourselves, we know that Norman is physically powerless, but the way that he is framed makes him seem opposing. Not only that, the first scene that we get with Norman is him stripping everything away from Otto Octavius. His life work and everything that Otto has worked towards is now gone, showing the power that he holds over the city and his rivals. This makes Norman pretty much invincible, even though he's not a physical threat. And more importantly, it makes him scary. And this was genius because we knew at some point he will become the Green Goblin, and it's just a matter of when, not if. But setting up Norman like this poses him as a threat before he even becomes one in the Green Goblin. And to give Norman this much power meant that his decline into becoming the Green Goblin was equally as important. But that is something that Marvel Spider-Man 2, I feel like, failed to live up to. So Marvel Spider-Man 1, as we've established, did a very good job of setting up how Norman is a very powerful man. But Marvel Spider-Man 2 didn't live up to taking that power away from him and giving us a convincing decline into what is going to become the Green Goblin in Marvel Spider-Man 3. During Marvel Spider-Man 2, we never actually saw what it meant for Norman to lose all of his power. We never saw what it meant for Norman to lose the mayor role of New York City. We never saw any implication of what Harry's health meant for Oscorp and his employees, and everything else riding on Norman and his business. In my opinion, it was a missed opportunity to have some sort of consequence resulting in him maybe losing a stake in Oscorp because of how much he was concentrating on Harry. Norman came across as powerless and desperate in Marvel Spider-Man 2, which is completely fine because, you know, if your son was dying, I mean, you would, right? However, they never showed him losing anything other than Harry. And that might seem quite backwards because, yeah, his son is dying, so obviously. But I'd argue that Norman Osborn as a character in general has always been framed as someone whose power always precedes him over anything else, including his family. That's just a trait of Norman Osborn that every single Spider-Man fan knows from every single piece of Spider-Man media that Norman has ever appeared in. We always get a sense between Peter and Harry that Peter always had a better home life than Harry Osborn did, and it's no secret that in Marvel Spider-Man and this universe, the same definitely applies. Norman's power and the influence he has over his riches and the city are never explored as much as they could have been, which is why, given the very strong and deliberate start to his journey in Marvel Spider-Man back in 2018, it hasn't really been fully realized through his decline. Now, maybe I'm jumping the gun because all of the concerns I have for Norman in this game might be fixed, resolved, and even explored in Marvel Spider-Man 3, and I really hope that they are. However, I think it was a massive missed opportunity, given this was a 20-hour game, to not focus on one of your main characters the same way that you set him up as in the first game. Like, Norman Osborn is one of the most important characters to this franchise as a whole, and I felt like he was just pushed to the sidelines and wasn't really given anything more to do other than to care about Harry, when there's so many more interesting stakes to that character from the first game that were never really touched upon. The first game gave us an almost perfect Norman Osborn, and the second game failed to deliver on the same quality of character analysis and depth that the first game did, which is why I think this scene feels kind of off.
Harry.
Pulse is weak. We gotta move.
What have you done? What have you done to him? I'm so sorry. I'm coming with you, wait.
Have you seen people react to this scene in a weird way? Maybe even you think this scene is a little bit weird, and that's because I think it is. And the reason I think it is because of what we've just been talking about. I believe that this scene would have worked if we spent more time with Norman as a person, exploring the desperate nature of his character more in depth. Because without further exploration of his character, this scene comes off as if his character just does a complete 180. At first, he tells Spider-Man in a scene prior to go and save his son. However, in this scene, when Spider-Man has saved his son, he then says, "It's your fault, bro." Just like, what? Wait, what do you mean it's his fault? Even Dr. Connors tells Spider-Man that the only way they can stop Venom is by killing the host, which would mean that Harry would die. But Harry didn't actually end up dying, he's just in a coma, meaning he is still alive. How come Norman doesn't realize this? Now, yes, some people will argue with me and tell me that, okay, if you see your son in that state, of course, everything else goes out the window, you're going to blame the first man on site, which was Spider-Man. And I'd agree with you if we actually got shown Norman's mental decline and him losing stuff prior to this scene. Like, for example, if we got shown Norman having a massive mental epilogue with himself about how it's all Spider-Man's fault, then maybe this would be more believable, but we didn't, so no, the scene just doesn't make any sense. And even so, during the end of the game, Norman should have come to his senses, right? Like, how are you still blaming Spider-Man? Like, he literally saved your son. That's why this is so disappointing. It leaves a sour taste in my mouth because I know that this is the catalyst, and some would even say the inciting incident into Norman's Green Goblin story in Marvel's Spider-Man 3. But I really hope there is more to come with this story, and this scene in particular, because it really isn't that great. But either way, we've got plenty of time to ponder over this character and the future games for this series. Make sure to leave your comments down below. I want to know what all of you think. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you guys in the next video. Take care and peace.